Hey, squirrel listeners. Sorry for having the same clothes on. They were just there and they're not dirty, so I just threw them on. I wanted to get on here before I get sleepy. It's torturous to watch me read and listen to me read when I'm getting so sleepy. The lines start going together and I lose my place and it's just a mess and I'm just like slurring the words. I'm not drunk on those, just drunk with sleepiness. So it's early in the 9:20ish, and I got up about 8. Chapter 10: Davy in Search of a Sensation. Anne, walking home from school through the birch path one November afternoon, felt convinced afresh that life was a very wonderful thing. The day had been a good day. All had gone well in her little kingdom. St. Clair Donnell had not fought any of the other boys over the question of his name. Prillie Rogerson's face had been so puffed up from the effects of a toothache that she did not once try to coquette with the boys in her vicinity. Barbara Shaw had met with only one accident, spilling a dipper of water over the floor, and Anthony Pye had not been in school at all. "What a nice month this November has been," said Anne, who had never quite got over her childish habit of talking to herself. November is usually such a disagreeable month, as if the year had suddenly found out that she was growing old and could do nothing but weep and fret over it. This year it's growing old gracefully, just like a stately old lady who knows she can be charming even with gray hair and wrinkles. We've had lovely days and delicious twilights. This last fortnight has been so peaceful, and even Davy has been almost well behaved. I really think he's improving a great deal. How quiet the woods are today, not a murmur except that soft wind purring in the treetops. It sounds like surf on a faraway shore. How dear the woods are, you beautiful trees. I love every one of you as a friend." Anne paused to throw her arm around a slim young birch and kiss its cream-white trunk. Diana, rounding a curve in the path, saw her and laughed. "Anne Shirley, you're only pretending to be grown up. I believe when you're alone, you're as much a little girl as you ever were." "Well, one can't get over the habit of being just a girl all at once," said Anne gaily. "You see, I was little for 14 years, and I've only been grow-uppish for scarcely 3. I'm sure I shall always feel a child in these woods. These walks home from school are almost the only time I have for dreaming, except the half hour or so where I go to sleep. Before I go to sleep, I thought, gosh, just a half hour. I'm so busy with teaching and studying and helping Marilla with the twins that I haven't another moment for imagining things. You don't know what splendid adventures I have for a little while after I go to bed in the East Gable every night. I always imagine I'm something very brilliant and triumphant and splendid. A great prima donna or a Red Cross nurse or a queen. Last night I was a queen. It's really splendid to imagine you're a queen. You have all the fun of it without any of the inconveniences, and you can stop being a queen whenever you want to, which you couldn't in real life. But here in the woods, I like best to imagine quite different things. I'm a dryad living in an old pine, or a little brown wood elf hiding under a crinkled leaf. That white birch you caught me kissing is a sister of mine. The only difference is she's a tree and I'm a girl, but that's no real difference. Where are you going, Diana?" "Down to the Dickens. I promised to help Alberta cut out her new dress. Can't you walk down in the evening, Anne, and come home with me?" "I might, since Fred Wright is away in town," said Anne with a rather too innocent face. Diana blushed, tossed her head, and walked on. She did not look offended, however. Anne truly intended to go down to the Dickenses that evening, but she did not. When she arrived at Green Gables, she found a state of affairs which banished every other thought from her mind, and Marilla met her in the yard, a wild-eyed Marilla. "Anne, Dora is lost." "Dora lost?" Anne looked at Davy, who was swinging on the yarn gate, and detected merriment in his eyes. "Davy, do you know where she is?" "No, I don't," said Davy stoutly. "I haven't seen her since dinner time. Cross my heart." "I've been away ever since 1 o'clock," said Marilla. "Thomas Lynn took sick all of a sudden, and Rachel sent up for me to go at once. When I left here, Dora was playing with her doll in the kitchen, and Davy was making mud pies behind the barn. I only got home half an hour ago, and no Dora to be seen. Davy declares he never saw her since I left." Neither I did," avowed Davy solemnly. "She must be somewhere around," said Anne. "She would never wander far away from home. You know how timid she is. Perhaps she's fallen asleep in one of the rooms." Marilla shook her head. "I've hunted the whole house through, but she may be in some of the buildings." A thorough search followed. Every corner of the house, yard, and outbuildings was ransacked by those two distracted people. Anne roved the orchards and the haunted wood, calling Dora's name. Marilla took a candle and explored the cellar. Davy accompanied each of them in turn, and was fertile in thinking of places where Dora could possibly be. Finally, they met again in the yard. "It's a most mysterious thing," groaned Marilla. "Where can she be?" said Anne miserably. "Maybe she's tumbled into the well," suggested Davy cheerfully. Anne and Marilla looked fearfully into each other's eyes. The thought had been with them both through their entire search, but neither had dared to put it into words. She might have," whispered Marilla. Anne, feeling faint and sick, went to the well box and peered over. The bucket sat on the shelf inside. Far down below was a tiny glimmer of still water. The Cuthbert well was the deepest in Avonlea. If Dora... But Anne could not face the idea. She shuddered and turned away. "Run across for Mr. Harrison," said Marilla, wringing her hands. "Mr. Harrison and John Henry are both away. They went to town today. I'll go for Mr. Barry." Mr. Barry came back with Anne carrying a coil of rope to which was attached a claw-like instrument that had been the business end of a grubbing fork. Marilla and Anne stood by, cold and shaken with horror and dread, while Mr. Barry dragged the well, and Davy, astride the gate, watched the group with a face indicative of huge enjoyment. Finally, Mr. Barry shook his head with a relieved air. "She can't be down there. It's a mighty curious thing where she could have got to, though. Look here, young man, are you sure you've no idea where your sister is?" "I've told you a dozen times that I haven't," said Davy with an injured air. "Maybe a tramp came and stole her." "Nonsense," said Marilla sharply, relieved from her horrible fear of the well. "And do you suppose she could have stayed over to Mr. Harrison's? She's always been talking about his parrot ever since that time you took her over. I can't believe Dora would venture so far alone, but I'll go over and see," said Anne. Nobody was looking at Davy just then, or it would have been seen that a very decided change came over his face. He quietly slipped off the gate and ran as fast as his fat legs could carry him to the barn. Anne hastened across the fields to the Harrison establishment. In no in no very hopeful frame of mind. The house was locked, the window shades were down, and there was no sign of anything living about the place. She stood on the veranda and called Dora loudly. Ginger in the kitchen became behind her, shrieked and swore with sudden fierceness between his outburst, and heard a plaintive cry from the little building in the yard which served Mr. Harrison as a toolbox. Anne flew to the door, unlashed it, and caught up a small mortal with a tear-stained face who was sitting forlornly on an upturned nail keg. "Oh, Dora, 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 what a fright you've given us! How came you to be here?" "Davy and I came over to see Ginger," sobbed Dora, "but we couldn't see him after all. Only Davy made him swear by kicking the door. And then Davy brought me here and run out and shut the door, and I couldn't get out. And I cried and I cried and I was frightened. And oh, I'm so hungry and cold, and I thought you'd never come, Anne." "Davy?" But Anne could say no more. She carried Dora home with a heavy heart. Her joy at finding the child safe and sound was drowned out in the pain caused by Davy's behavior. The freak of shutting Dora up might easily have been pardoned, but Davy had told falsehoods, downright cold-blooded falsehoods. Above it, that was the ugly part. And Anne could not shut her eyes to it. She could not. She could have sat down and cried with sheer disappointment. She had grown to love Davy dearly. How dearly she had not known until this minute, and it hurt her unbearably to discover that he was guilty of deliberate falsehood. Marilla listened to Anne's tale in a silence that boded no good Davy Ward. Mr. Barry laughed and advised that Davy be summarily dealt with. When he had gone home, Anne soothed and warmed the sobbing, shivering Dora, got her supper, and put her to bed. Then she returned to the kitchen just as Marilla came grimly in, leading, or rather pulling, the reluctant, cobwebby Davy, whom she had just found hidden away in the darkest corner of the stable. She jerked him to the mat on the middle of the floor, and then went and sat down by the east window. Anne was sitting limply by the west window. Between them stood the culprit. His back was toward Marilla, and it was meek and subdued. It was a meek, subdued, frightened back, but his face was toward Anne, and although it was a little shamefaced, there was a gleam of comradeship in Davy's eyes, as if he knew he had done wrong. But he was going to be punished for it, but could count on a laugh over it all with Anne later on. But no half-hidden smile answered him in Anne's gray eyes, as there might have done had it been a question of mischief. There was something else, something ugly and repulsive. "How could you behave so, Davy?" she asked sorrowfully. Davy squirmed uncomfortably. "I just did it for fun. Things have been so awful quiet here for so long. I thought it would be fun to give you folks a big scare." It was, too. In spite of fear and a little remorse, Davy grinned over the whole recollection. "But you told a falsehood about it, Davy," said Anne, more sorrowfully than ever. Davy looked puzzled. "What's a falsehood? Do you mean a whopper?" "I mean a story that was not true." 'Cause I did, said Davy frankly. If I hadn't, you wouldn't have been scared. I had to tell it. Anne was feeling the reaction from her fright and exertions. Davy's impenitent attitude gave the finishing touch, two big tears brimming up in her eyes. Oh, Davy, how could you? You said with a quiver in her voice. Don't you know you've been wrong? Don't you know how wrong it was? Davy was aghast. Anne was crying. He had made Anne cry. A flood of real remorse rolled like a wave over him, over his warm little heart, and engulfed it. He rushed to Anne, hurled himself into her lap. He flung his arms around her neck and burst into tears. I didn't know it was wrong to tell whoppers, he sobbed. How did you expect me to know it was wrong? Let's see, I don't know. All Mr. Splot's children told them regular, every day, and cross their hearts too. I suppose Pa Irving never tells whoppers. And here I've been telling awful hard. I've been trying awful hard to be as good as him, but now I suppose you'll never love me again. But I think you might have told me it was wrong. I'm awful sorry I've made you cry, Anne, and I'll never tell a whopper again. Davy blurred his face, and Aunt buried his face in Anne's shoulder and cried stormily. Anne, in a sudden glad flash of understanding, held him tight and looked over his curly thatch at Marilla. He didn't know it was wrong to tell falsehoods, Marilla. I think we must forgive him for that part of it. This time he will promise never again to say what isn't true. I never will, now that I know it's bad, Davy said between sobs. If you ever catch me telling a whopper again, you can. Davy groped mentally for a suitable penance. You can skin me alive, Annie. I'm going to have to stop right there because y'all, you know what's happening. I'm getting so sleepy. And it's already been kind of a terrible recording. But thanks for listening. Have a great day. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Hope to see you live at 5. Tea with GrannyDee. Love you bunches. Bye-bye.